Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of the EUphoria podcast, the podcast about all things EU LCS. We're going to be talking about overhyped and underrated players today, the EU LCS Power Rankings, some quick-fire predictions, now known as Quickshots, and our topics of the day are going to be the League of Upsets and the team known as Vitality. My name is Daniel Drakos. Joining me, my fellow host, Martin Deficio Lunga, and our special guest of the day, Jacob YamatoCannon Mebdi. Welcome, YamatoCannon.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here, man.
How's your morning, Yamato?
Oh, that wasn't a pleasure. That's
Why don't you tell people the story of how you got here, Yamato?
We want to hear that.
I was assuming we would just go to the classic studio where you guys got this place all fancy in the middle of nowhere. So I just assumed that I would know everything. So I didn't really ask for any extra information. So when I jumped into the cab and the driver was like, "So you're going to blah, 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 Strasse?" And I was like, blah, 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 what? I'm just going to trust you, drive me, no problem. And he drives me to a place, he's like, "Oh, I can't drive further." He's like, he just points in that direction, like in a random direction. He's like, "It's over there." I'm like, all right. And it's like, I'm not wearing my jacket. I thought it would just be like 2 meters walk outside, you know, all of a sudden there's a storm. All those are against me. It's raining. I'm completely wet right now. And it was crazy because I was walking down the street and I had no idea what I was looking for. I was like, the only point of reference is what I have is Deficio and Drakos. So I started looking for people that look like you guys. And, you know, after 10 minutes of walking in the cold, I started seeing you guys everywhere, you know. It was driving me crazy. And I was like, my thought was like, I don't have Wi-Fi on my phone. I need to find Wi-Fi. So I ended this laser game and this guy forced me to like buy a Snickers to get Wi-Fi. That didn't really work. And then I got saved by Clement. He called me on my phone, our manager, and he said, they tried to reach you. And I see I have like 5 missed calls. And I was like, yeah, I should probably check my phone.
Yeah, what? You didn't get that call? You didn't check your phone?
Okay, so for context on our end, we're planning to shoot at 10:30. It's like 10:35. We're like, oh, that's cool. Yamato will be late. By 10:45, we're like, he's dead.
Yeah, he's gone.
It's happened. Yamato doesn't sleep in. We know that. So Yamato is definitely dead. And we find out. And the best part is you come in. And for people who don't know, Yamato is either dressed to the nines or totally casual. So he comes in, he's super casual, and he is soaked. I mean, he has been out in the rain for at least a half an hour at water, and he's still soaked, sitting now to record the podcast.
Today we learned, 1, check your phone. 2, have internet on your phone in case
put out some signs. Come on. I was like, yeah, find the little sign.
The edge of Berlin is not clear enough
Basically,
for you?
for next week, we'll get a giant sign of me and Drakos, our faces. Yeah. We're going to hang it on a massive wall out here so everyone can see it, and this will never happen again. But now we're here.
Problem solved. We are here, and we can get into things.
I love the story, by the way. Fantastic storytelling.
All right, now it is time for Overhyped and Underrated. This week we are going to be doing players. So everyone has picked a player that they think is either overhyped or underrated. Yamato, you've been out in the rain. You've been out in the cold. So we'll give you a break. I'm going to go first. My underrated player, it's going to be very controversial, guys. Get ready, is Ruin.
From Giants.
From Giants. Top laner of Giants. Now, I know you're thinking, that's dumb as hell. Everybody knows Ruin is going really well. But I don't think just that Ruin is underrated. I think Ruin right now is the best performing top laner in Europe. I think he's outclassing all the old names that people are getting comfortable with. Wunder, Bizichachi, Soaz. I think Wunder is playing so consistently. I think he is always finding advantages for his team outside of just in the laning phase. And he's building most of those advantages by himself.
I don't really consider him underrated because everything I'm reading is the community is hyping him up and saying he's the best player on Giants, which is true at the moment. Like I think he is really good, but calling him the best top laner in Europe already 2 weeks in. First of all, he's not even played like Bizichachi yet up in the top lane.
Look, I've watched Bizichachi play, and I'm confident because you know what Ruin didn't do? Die alone in the side lane. Hasn't happened once. Bizichachi does that all the time. Just saying, I don't see, like, yes, he has made some small mistakes, but for the most part, this man is playing flawlessly.
He's not played Soaz either, so that's another one.
You're holding back putting Ruin as number one because he has yet to play Soaz.
I feel like I need to see him play against.
What do you think it's fair to say right now that he is the best performing top laner in Europe? Come on, I mean that's what I'm saying, right? I'm not saying that he's the best performing top laner forever. I'm saying that in the last few weeks, Ruin has been a clear number one for me as a top laner.
I think when it comes to Ruin, I think he's fortunate to stay in Giants. And Naruto Rodor was like a part of the coaching staff in the past. And I think the idea of how Giants played in the past is still within Giants, is pretty much play a tank up top side or Nar sometimes, which is Ruin's like a signature champion. And they're playing the same standard way, which is like group up like a death ball and just roll down your enemies. And I think at this point in time, in Spring Split, it's probably the best way of picking up wins because it's very simple. I think playing a split push game or trying to do something more complicated, that's very hard. So I'm thinking, Ruin in terms of playing the simple tanks, the Ornn, I think he does it very well. His Nara is very, very good.
Yeah.
But I want to see him in those matchups that are more like, carnivorous, so to speak. I think he's being a bit of a vegetarian up top of what it is.
I mean, you say that, but this man, outside of, once again, the White Knight outplay that was mostly White Knight throwing himself under attack, this man has been solo generating advantages, roaming to do other things, right? So I find this really impressive, and I'm curious from your perspective, Yamato, do you expect when you pick a tank top laner for your top laner to solo, like, get a massive CS lead and roam to help other lanes? Like, is that something you rely on or expect from a player?
I think the main thing is what you mentioned. That's the memory that is stuck in my mind when I think of Ruin, when Camille, it was White Knight, they ulted way too early, Evelyn was nowhere to be found, and then just eat into pre-nerf Ornn. So that was a bit...
Way to ruin the outplay.
It was a bit crazy. And then, like, if a tank is ahead, a scaling champion is ahead, and of course Ornn is a bit busted, then he's going to be in a position where it's very easy to impact. But he played out the situation very well. He roamed around. He was sending Ornn ultimates all across the map. So I'll give that to him. I think the situation he's been given, I think he's performed them as well as he could. And I think that's a big plus in 4 games.
He's definitely very good. Before I call him the best performing top laner, I just want to see him 1v1 against like Soas and Chachi specifically. I do agree though. I think when he gets the advantage, he's really good at using it to move into mid lane very often and gank mid lane or set up a good engage for the team. So he's definitely one of the better players in the early weeks, which is impressive. And obviously Giants have surprised all of us. So I think Ruin he's interesting and he's good.
All right, well, you're not willing to give me the hard number 1, so we'll give up on Ruin for now, but I might come back with a passion after he plays Soaz and wins as clearly the number 1 top laner at the moment. But Yamato, I want to save Deficios for last, because hint, he's told me what it is, and it's a little spicy. So why don't you, who's your... We'll find out if I'm overhyped or underrated, I guess. Who is your overhyped or underrated player, Yamato?
I think, speaking of Ruin, I think the underrated player for me is Cabochard. I think when it comes to public perception about Cabochard, people think of him as the Lucian player that is telling everyone to gank his lane, to dive his lane, etc. And I think this is far from the truth. I know that in the past, it might have been like that in past Vitality rosters or in situations like in Gambit where Diamond Procs and Cabochard was like the combo to look out for. If they don't get a hit top lane, the game is over, and that was true. And I just have been looking at him like the split I worked with him last year. Like his most played was Rumble. Like that's a champion you just leave on an island. It's about, sure, you push in and you create priority, but eventually you're going to lose the split push and you're just going to look to group and team fight. He was playing a lot of Gragas and he was playing a lot of these tanks, which was the meta at the time. And he's definitely branched out a lot as a player. And in this case, we had, the reason why I segue Ruin into Kawasha was because his Gangplank performance into Ruin, I think Ruin showed that his champion pool was quite predictable. He landed on the Cho'Gath, and Cho'Gath into Gangplank is a matchup that is good for Cho'Gath in the early because he can push and create pressure, but eventually he's going to get kited and eaten alive by barrels. And I think Kawasha played that game phenomenally. I kind of put Kawu in a rough spot when he played Lucian against Fnatic because he didn't really do anything that game, so that's on me. But generally speaking, I think Cabochard is very diverse as a player.
Because I'm curious because when we see Cabo on stage, right, especially with this, because last year's Vitality roster, generally the team was struggling, so it's hard for me to give Cabo a ton of credit there, right? And then this year, I mean, you've got Jiizuke literally tearing it up every game. So I don't see anything from Cabochard. And so it's hard for me to say 100% that he's good or he's bad. So I'm curious, is he a monster in scrims? What do you see from this guy, like from a behind the scenes perspective, that makes you think that he's underrated or underappreciated?
So in practice, there's never been a top laner that is like, oh, he's playing against this guy, we're going to have a hard time. There's never been a scenario that is like this. I think he can compete against any top laner in Europe, and he has a champion pool that is wider than anyone else's too, and he has the guts to pull it out even though he hasn't played it for a long time. And I think in the current drafting format, that's a big advantage. He has like 3 picks into every champion you play into top lane, even more sometimes. And his role in how to play the game and his experience really shows in his calmness and his demeanor in the game as well.
So one question I have is, with how Jiizuke is playing and mini true packs and team fights, wouldn't it sometimes benefit Vitality more to have Cabochard not on a carry, but more on an Ornn, something like that, like a tank up in the top lane? Because he's played Jace, Gangplank, Lucian, Jax at the moment, and most of those picks normally are picks you want to play around in the early game to get a bigger advantage. And you guys did that with the Jace, which of course was very effective in that first game. But do you not sometimes feel that actually having a tank top lane with how your carries are playing at the moment would benefit the team overall?
I think it's a question of my own philosophy to the game. For example, the Misfits game, people are like, why do you pick Jax? You have so much damage already on your team. But we are not aiming to team fight an Azir, like an Azir, Cho'Gath, Kog'Maw, and whatever else they had. You're not going to team fight that ever. The point is you want to split them up. You want to create pressure on side. So I'm going to draft into Jax. And the biggest reason is that a lot of the teams right now, because it's the easiest way of playing the game, are just drafting these bulldozer composition. I think the best analogy for it is that everyone is playing Protoss, which is like this death ball of units that people use in StarCraft, and we're playing Zerg. We're just swarming the map and we're pressuring the map with the Tahm Kench and playing the split push. So we're just trying to pressure people on the sides, putting ourselves in good matchups and creating early game advantages. So I think it's just about my own philosophy to the game. You're not going to out team fight a team that drafts so heavily into it, so you need to find a different approach.
I think that's pretty interesting. I want to see. Still feel like I want to see more from Cabo, and I wonder, because the nice thing about you talking about running the strategy is that it does open up more opportunities for Cabo to look like a star player, right? Because outside of when a Camille tower dives you, it's hard to look amazing as a tank player, right? You're not going to get those flashy outplays that people kind of.
only on Gnar, I guess, if you get like huge Mega Gnar ults, that's kind of the main one where we see them shine on tanks. Yeah,
but I think we're going to talk more about Vitality as the show goes on, and I'm curious how Cabo will fit into that as we dive deeper into the team. But for now, Martin Deficio Lunga, you were last on the list. Who do you overhyped, underrated?
So you guys obviously are boring and went with the underrated ones. So I feel like I have to go for the overhyped one.
Okay.
And for mine, I'm picking Reckless for overhyped.
Now, when the Fnatic fans come to kill you, do you think it will be pitchforks and torches? What do you think will be their preferred?
They won't find us out here.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to stay here.
The truth as to why we record in the middle of nowhere has been revealed. Find me.
But, so, Reckless. This is obviously based on the first 2 weeks of play we have seen, so it's a 4-game sample size at the moment. This is our Summer Split MVP, who the entire Fnatic team played around, relied on, and he was a huge superstar last split. This split, I actually feel like he's almost hurting his team more than he's helping sometimes, in the way he's still trying to play the game. Outside of laning phase, which is fine, as soon as we get to mid to late game, Reckless is sitting in the side lane like he wants to. He overextends way too much and doesn't seem to have any connection with the rest of the team on where they are on the map, and he gets caught out, he dies because of it, slows down the entire game for the team. And also, we have had team fights where he's too eager, he's in the front line, he gets a Sejuani ult in his face as a Xayah, with ult and flash, everything available. He dies instantly, the game gets delayed once again. And some of these individual mistakes that I didn't feel like Reckless did last year. And I looked at him coming into this bit saying, okay, Sven is gone. Like, Reckless just signed a 3-year deal. He's the star player on Fnatic. His main competition is gone. Like, this is really gonna be the year of and the split of Reckless, where he's gonna be far and away the best AD carry in Europe. And the first 2 weeks has not shown me that. It's actually been very disappointing for me because I think he seems disconnected from the rest of his team. And one of the biggest examples for me is actually against Vitality and YamatoCannon, where they steal a Baron 28, 30 minutes. They're getting back in the game after losing the early game. And then when the entire half the team is in base, trying to run from base, and the mid laner Caps is just pushing out mid, Reckless is already pushing at Vitality's tier 2 tower. All alone. He gets caught out with the Baron buff. He dies. Fnatic can't do anything with it. And it's just some of those things where I'm like, you didn't do this last split. Last split, he was really good at understanding how to play in the side lane. And now it just seems different. So from a player who I'm expecting to be one of the absolute best players in Europe and one of the big stars in Fnatic, I have not seen that so far. And I think he's actually cost this team quite a lot when he's getting caught out, which needs to change because he needs to be the best AD carry in Europe.
That's my question first for you, Yamato, is do you think it's fair to set this expectation that Reckless, with the departure of Sven, should be the strongest player in Europe? And then
the best AD carry.
Best AD carry in Europe. And then additionally, what was your impression kind of playing against him? What did you see? Where do you actually feel like he actually stands now?
I think like coming into the split, I think everyone thought that Reckless would be the best AD carry. And I'm pretty sure that he's going to maintain that role as the split proceeds, unless Mini Trupax overtakes him once again. You know, this one matchup he overtook him, and maybe it continues. But in terms of Fnatic, I think I'm trying to think back to their last year's spring split. It also looked really bad for how the team was looking. They did the roster swaps with the jungle, and in general, Fnatic looked very weak until they came into playoffs and took, I think, third place. And I think Fnatic is just a team that seems to be somewhat of a slow starter. I think when it comes to Fnatic, my main question is it just early spring split, or is it just the lack of Jesses that is going to hurt them? Because their mid game, I think that's just seems so frustrating for everyone to play. And I think especially in the game against us, we were split pushing and they were just grouping in mid. They were actually doing nothing. It seemed like Fnatic had no clue how to break our split push. And eventually you get frustrated and you get caught off guard. But I have to agree with the fact that these mistakes are some mistakes that you don't expect from Reckless, because he was the side lane AD carry king in the past.
Yeah, and it's interesting because last spring split you talk about having a lot of new players, figuring out how a new roster is going to work, but like they kept the vast majority of the roster, right? Hylissang is the only swap out. So is this just showing us how important Jesus was to making this team function, or do we think that there's bigger reasons as to why this team is struggling? Because in theory, like I think in terms of who we rated as top teams in Europe, between me and Deficio at least, we rated Fnatic #1 because they had the least changes. Yeah. They were the strongest team in summer prior to playoffs, right, where they did falter against Misfits admittedly, and they even look good at Worlds. So I just, on paper, you look at this team coming into spring and you expect absolute domination.
It's just, it's so hard to say. It's best of one. We don't know what happened in the offseason, how the prep was going into the split, but that's why I was looking at individual members to shine, and Reckless, of course, being the first one I looked at. And with this performance over the last 2 weeks, I just have to say that he's not performing well enough. Now, with a player like Reckless, that can change. Legit, this week, he can already look much better, and suddenly this discussion is done, and he's back to being the best AD carry. You know, that can happen.
But let's take this from like the perspective of a Fnatic fan, right? If you're a Fnatic fan and you know that randomly Reckless is just going to underperform for seemingly no reason at all and can turn it on in a second, isn't that really frustrating? Like, doesn't that just seem really irritating that this guy who has the potential to play at such a high level is underperforming and we're not getting any kind of reason or logic behind it, and then suddenly week 3, Reckless is a god again? No context.
I think it's one of the things about emotional players. Potentially that could be a thing for him. Another one is if he, when you are already a great player, if you are just in a little bit of a slump it can be a million reasons. Like if you ask Reckless, maybe it's because the meta doesn't fit him, or maybe it's because there's a part of the team he still needs to figure out how they're going to play, and that's going to change how he plays. Like there can be a lot of reasons for it, for him to suddenly hit back to that top level again. I just think for him, The biggest thing is just what seems to be lack of synergy with how the rest of Fnatic wants to play, especially in the mid game. I'm not talking early laning phase, I'm talking mid game, where he's pushing in a side lane, the rest of the team is not able to kind of match what's happening, or he's going too far, he gets caught out, he dies, and those kind of things just need to change for Fnatic over these few weeks. They have now 4 games to review. I'm sure they have some scrims to review as well, and then to fix this, because Fnatic needs to be one of the best teams in Europe with this lineup.
All right. Final question to Yamato to kind of wrap this up. Is this going to happen? Do you think that Reckless is going to turn it on in a week? And if so, do you think it's going to be this week? Or do you kind of expect this to be maybe a bit of a longer process?
I think in Europe, there's very few players that I would call seasoned, like championship players.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the players that are left, Perks, Soaz, Reckless, these are players that know how to put themselves up to that level. And when you know the recipe for your own success and know the recipe for how you get onto that level again, I think you can kind of scatter your energy evenly throughout the season in a way. I think the best example is probably G2 when they came back from MSI and they had the subs coming in and they were scrimming a lot less and they were practicing a lot less because they didn't want to get burnt out. And in the beginning, they look horrible. But eventually...
Oh, yeah, they lost a lot.
Yeah, they lost a lot of games. And eventually everyone's like, G2 is over, Fnatic is the best, Fnatic is rolling them over. This was like the last game of the split, I think, when Fnatic just like destroyed them. And then eventually G2 just popped off in the finals and against Misfits and completely dismantled them, like completely destroyed them. And I think G2 had the benefit of having Sven, Mithy, also championship players, I would say. And of course, you can't say anything else about Trick either and expect because they were just winning title after title. So I think when it comes to Reckless bouncing back, it's going to happen for sure.
I agree. I think he ends the split as the best AD carry in Europe. He just doesn't play like it right now.
All right, we'll find out. Maybe it's week 3. We'll see. What week is it going to be?
Maybe it's week 8, randomly.
When is Championship Reckless going to show
up? Oh, it's when they play Vitality again. He's going to punish me to true legs.
No idea.
All right, next up, our first weekly topic. It is the League of Upsets, the League of Underdogs. Nothing makes sense anymore. Deficio got a 50% on his predictions last week.
Better than Perks, who had 40%.
Which we'll talk about more later as well. But I want to start this off. Obviously, perceived bottom teams are now at the top of the ladder.
Okay.
Perceived top teams are somewhere in the middle. Teams that you thought might be in the middle are at the bottom. Everything is not where it was expected to be. So why is the league... Why are nobody's preseason predictions turning out to be correct? Why is the league so upside down right now? What is causing, all of these teams that we didn't expect to be successful, and all the teams that we thought would be top teams to kind of falter in a lot of these matchups?
Easy first answer. It's best of one, and we're very early on in the split. So there's a lot of weeks, a lot of things can change. Teams who bring in 3 to 4 new players. Some teams click instantly. There's chemistry. Everything is working from the start, at least until you think it's working until you hit a roadblock down the line. Other teams will take more time to figure out how to play together. I think a team like G2, there's still a lot of things they need to figure out in terms of how to play mid to late game, which is a big problem for them. But Giants, on the other hand, they seem to click instantly. There's interviews from Joko and Steelback talking about how they all knew exactly how they wanted to play. They all had the same mindset, and it was really easy to just start playing as a team.
All right, you're bringing up a lot of stuff, Deficio, and there is a lot of arguments to be made, but let's just start with format. Yamato, how big of a determining factor is best of 1? What is your impression here? Because I look at G2, right, and I don't know if that team could win a best of 3 either right now. I don't know how big is this to you, the format?
I think what's evident for me in best of 1 is that some people get punished really hard when they don't know how to draft. There's been times where I'm thinking, I'm walking off stage and I'm laughing to myself. I'm like, this game is over because of the draft. And I think
you messed up so badly.
I don't know. These 4 games that we played, Misfits was the only one we lost. We were 8K gold ahead. So I don't know, Kevin.
I blame the coach for that one.
yeah, sure. You can blame me all you want. That's fine. Like when it comes to best of 1, the biggest difference for me is, sure, there is a randomness factor. Sometimes one guy just thinks about money or something, the Eiffel Tower. I don't know what he's thinking about.
Something not important to the game.
And he just dies. Randomly happens. Has happened to SKT players or whatever players you want to. Maybe SKT isn't the best.
Taker got sniped by
it's
Redemption,
happened.
so
It's
it's actually
Yeah.
They're
perfectly
losing a lot
appropriate.
right now.
Yeah. So my point is, it's like it can happen to anyone. So there's a randomness factor to it. Best of one right now. The biggest difference to what it used to be is that the draft is so much more important and impactful, because in the past there was no 5 bans on each team. There was no second rotation, second phase. So all these cheesy strats that people like to call them, if we bust out a Lucian or some champion that people don't know about, and then it has so much more impact, because it's like you're sitting there and you're like, damn, what do I do next, in draft? So I think that matters a lot. I think a lot of the coaches in Europe, or at least teams in Europe, I think they are drafting very wrong. And I think that has also a big impact on how the best of ones play out.
Yeah, draft is definitely super important. Another thing kind of tied to draft is just the current meta. The current meta, to me, does not punish teams very much or very hard, because you have so many tools to survive the early game. And I always like to look at really, really good teams most of the time understand how to snowball an early advantage very cleanly. They know which lanes to play around. They can play 1-3-1 split push. They can go into a Baron at 20 minutes without having a Cho'Gath and a Azir and something else that can just burn down the Baron in 2 seconds. And they know how to set up around the Baron to create picks and punish the team further, and then kind of use that to win the game, which is what we've seen in other metas, where a lot of the weaker teams, they struggle to do that a lot. They don't win the early skirmishes. They don't play around the correct lane. They don't set up properly for the early Baron, and then they get punished. But in this meta, picking, scaling champions that can group and team fight with 5 stopwatches, overheal, relic shields, makes it really hard to get punished in the early game. And suddenly, you don't have to worry too much about playing 1-3-1 split push for most teams. You don't have to worry about perfectly executing the Baron, because you have a huge death ball of a teamfight comp. You just want to basically group mid and force a big teamfight if you can. And that's what Rocket and Giants are doing extremely successful. They pick good late game teamfight comps. They don't get punished early, and they play it well. And that's one of the main reasons they can win so many games in this meta.
The thing that's really weird to me is that we're talking, because if you told me that a team could get through early game guaranteed without being punished, I would assume that would help good teams. Teams that would outplay in the mid to late game, coming in even, could out macro an opposition.
But
because in the past,
macro right now, like, what does that even mean at this point?
Maybe that's fair, but it feels to me like in the past, when we look at best of one, 2-3 years ago now, the way that lower tier teams got wins off of higher tier teams was like hardcore early game leads, right? Like killing a ton of people in the early game. And it's so bizarre to me now that the way that perceived lower tier teams might be getting wins over a team like G2, right? Or whatever, whoever the team might be, right? Let's just random team, assume it's not someone in the EULCS, is through sitting still in the early game and just waiting to scale. That is not something that I would normally associate with a less coordinated team.
I feel like with the current champions executing late game teamfights in Yamato, I want to hear your opinion on this as well. Like, playing a late game teamfight now, if you have Braum, Tristana, Azir, Sejuani, and Ornn, is a lot easier than if you were running with a triple carry late game setup and you had to execute a big late game fight because you couldn't snowball the early game, which is what we have seen in the past. Now, for most teams, it is easier to play late game fights if you draft for big late game teamfight comps.
I think, I have to agree. Like, when you look at Rocket and Giants, their way of playing has been just tank up top unless it's Gnar, which still fills the same role. Like, you can team fight, which was what they were doing still with Gnar. He wasn't like split pushing and taking like Nexus towers or something. It was team fighting Gnar, and that's the recipe that is working for them. And I think our game against Giants, like, my plan coming into that game was like, I want to make sure at 20 minutes, if we aren't bleeding bad, that we will be much stronger than them. And our comp was way better than theirs at every
what was your
angle.
draft again? Do you remember? Just for context.
So we had up top it was Cho'Gath against Gangplank. In mid lane it was Ryze against Azir. I think bot lane was
You had Caitlyn.
Caitlyn and
And Tahm
Tahm Kench versus Zyra Khan. And like we heavily outrange the enemy team. They
And then
don't have
Gragas jungle.
and Gragas jungle, so we can disengage. We heavily outrange the enemy team. We can poke them. We can play very slow. Cho'Gath is going to be like a walking block of meat that's not going to touch anyone because we have slows for days. And that was my idea coming into the game. And we didn't bleed too bad coming into the mid to late game. And Giants made the mistake of not forcing Nashor, but we just outscaled them and it worked.
And that actually fits perfectly with the point here. This was the one game where Giants played a comp that got outscaled out of the games they've played so far. That was the one game they lost as well, where they didn't properly execute on how to further snowball and finish the game before the late game comp kicked in, and they ended up losing late game fights and losing the game. That being said, though, I actually don't want to take too much away from Giants of Rocket, because I think they have been doing extremely well in this meta, and a lot of credit to them for figuring out how to win as many games as possible in this current setup. And I think some of the players have played better individually than I expected coming into the split, especially in late game fights. And looking at someone like Betsy on Giants, the Veigar game was spot on from him in a lot of ways. And he's done well in late game team fights. On the side of Rocket, I think Hikyu is actually doing well in late game team fights as well. And that's important for these teams and why they're sitting at the top. I just want to see, before I call them clear-cut top teams in Europe, I need to see a meta shift. And I need to see them change to that new meta where it's going to be more about early to mid-game, and then see if they can still keep this up.
The other thing that Yamato brought up just on this subject that I think that we keep kind of going back to, as it seems pretty important, it is drafting in the current meta and like what it actually takes. And I think the simple analysis that I've seen is get as much scaling as humanly possible and survive is the premium way to draft. But I have a feeling there's no way that could be right. But we are seeing, you mentioned Giants mostly winning throughout drafting or getting bigger scaling compositions. How much truth is there to that concept that you just need to outscale the opposition? Is there another way to play the game?
Well, like I think our game against Misfits was a good example. Like we drafted Jackson to Cho'Gath because it's a matchup that it's good on side, but you'll always lose the team fight against Cho'Gath as Jax. So that was like us playing for the early game. We had Zoe against Azir, and the enemy team was outscaling us 100%, and we managed to get all the turrets we wanted and all the lead that we wanted, but eventually we just entered at Nash. And to be honest, like in the position we were in, the game was supposed to be over if we just executed the Nashor properly. That was a game that was in our hands that we just dropped. Yeah. And that was the case that Misfits heavily outscaled us. Because like my philosophy is, like I think it's easy to pick up wins with these tank compositions, but I'm thinking a bit further ahead because I think like when the tanks are starting to get nerfed, like we're saying tanks, but how many tanks are there in top lane? There's Ornn and Cho'Gath. Ornn got nerfed, and then there's Shen. Not a lot of people playing Shen, but the tank pool up top is very, very small. If people are going to bust out a Maokai, sure, maybe, but it's a champion that's going to have a very hard time in lane right now.
Yeah.
So when these champs start to get nerfed, I think we will see a difference in performance, because Cho'Gath and Ornn, the biggest difference between other tanks and these two tanks is that their lane phase is insane, and that's a big issue.
Yeah, and so for me, it's if the answer to winning is this simple, right? Is this draft scaling, or if this is the easier way to play the game, the tanks, Cho'Gath and Ornn, you've opted for a method where you're saying you're going to try new things for greater progress down the line. You want your team to be able to be flexible, to play different comps. Do we think that that's the same thing that a team like Fnatic or G2 or Misfits are trying to do as well? Or is this a misread on the meta? Because to me, I see your argument. You presenting it here obviously makes it a lot easier for me to see that argument. But for Misfits, like in that game one where they had the Zyrakan bot lane and the Galio, that doesn't feel to me like they're a team that's drafting so that they can learn more from the experience and be better down the line. That feels like a completely incorrect read on the meta.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair to say that they thought it was going to be a lot about early snowball around bot side, which ended up being the complete opposite because of stopwatches and overheal and these things. So that was definitely a misread. I do think the read on Galio was interesting because everyone kind of laughed at him in week one when they picked it and lost. And then it started getting first picked in LCK a week later, and then was banned 6 out of 10 times in Europe as well, week 2. So I think Galio was spot on, or was correct, but the Zyrakan try and bully the bot lane. And it wasn't just Misfits. Fnatic played Zyrakan. We had a few of those. where none of them were super successful. I think Fnatic was the one who executed the best, but it was actually not in lane, but more outside. It is interesting, though, because I like Yamato's idea of try and pick something that can win early game. I don't think actually that's the case for G2, and why they're losing. They're playing a lot of tank tops.
Yeah.
But they're not playing team fights that well at the moment, which is a huge issue. Rocket and Giants, as the examples, are playing them well in the late game. And like the Giants game, G2 blind pick Skarner, you're a coach, YamatoCannon. If you blind pick Skarner and Tom Kench is in the meta.
And Thresh. Oh my god.
And then you grab Thresh after when the enemy has already shown the Tom Kench that you didn't pick. And then you have Skarner Thresh against Tom Kench. Like, unless you hook the Tom Kench, I guess, and pull him in and try and kill him through his gray health as well. And he's the Tom Kench, he's the tank. You don't really want to kill him first. That's not going to work late game against Sejuani, Veigar, Caitlyn, these kind of picks. So they just got outscaled and then they lose. And it's one of those games where I'm like, you didn't even try and pick a more early game focus comp specifically because you had like Gangplank, Israel, Azir, so you had great late game as well. You just messed up completely.
Yeah, okay, so this is one, thank you for bringing that up. I tried to block that drafting decision out of my mind forever because it was quite traumatic.
The combo, dude.
Yeah.
The combo.
The lands run out,
You
yeah.
can only eat one person. Thresh will hook one, he'll eat him, and then Skarner can ult somebody. There's no way. It's unstoppable, guys. But, Yamato, from your perspective, it's just a side note, because I'm curious. Have you ever just forgot about a champion in draft?
Oh, yeah.
Like, is there like a top 20 champion, right, that's like probably good in a role? Like, not Ryze or Azir, let's say like Zoe or something, you know, or a Malzahar or whatever. Have you ever like gone into a draft and just been like, in halfway through second ban phase, you're like, oh crap, we forgot about, in this case, Tom Kench.
Like when it comes to like the 4 mid laners, no, those mid laners I would never forget because this is the only thing people have been playing, like Malzahar, Zoe.
Yeah.
But like sometimes some things pop up and you just need to be flexible because like there's so many variables in draft that people can play whatever the hell they want, and it could be like a cocktail. You need to be on your feet. So like what I do when it comes into draft preparation wise is like I set some expectations, and then I'm like, if they throw something else at me, I'm just gonna handle it when it comes. And so far, my track record,
Nice confidence.
my
There you
track
go.
record has been good, you know,
There you go.
because that's how I do it in scrims, and that's how I'm practicing my own drafting. So why not?
Give us an example. Give us an example of someone who threw a curveball and then you adapted on the spot. Doesn't have to be this, but it could be last split or something as well.
Like I know it hasn't happened this split. Sometimes I laugh at other people's bans because I'm like, why? And but beyond that, I'm trying to think of curveballs. Like the only thing I'm thinking about is how like the opposition just inter-draft over and over, like in best of fives. I remember like against H2K, the curveball was that they kept picking the same matchup. Like we were getting Gnar every single game.
the famous one.
Like that was a curveball in the sense that it was like curveballing out of the window. You know, it was
Yeah, so
it was
for people
not
who
aimed
remember,
at me.
this is a Splice versus H2K semifinal where Gnar GP, right, was the top lane matchup 5 games in a row, and Wonder probably played some of the best Gnar games of his life, and like probably, or who was ever in charge of the draft at that point was like, nah, it's cool. He ulted 4 people 6 times in a row that game. Let's do it again. This time, it's going to be different. And this is original Black Cleaver Frozen Mountain Gnar era where he was an absolute terror.
It was also like another example was like when we played UL in regional qualifier. The matchup was Gangplank against Shen. And they were so stuck on, Vichisachi's Shen, that's the stuff, that's the good stuff right there, you know? And we were like, Gangplank is a hard counter. Like, screw you guys. You ult, you're gonna Gangplank ult,
right.
and Gangplank is fantastic. So those are the curveballs that I remember.
Those seem like pretty easy curveballs for you to react to.
Most of the
Okay.
curveballs don't. Those sound like softballs. Like someone's just
Yeah, I was hoping it would be like someone just picked a whole new champion. You were like, whoa! And you were like, adapting.
I like that all of the curveballs you've listed are people counter-picking themselves. that sounds like you've had a nice path there as coach.
I would have to think about it, but there's nothing that sticks out in my mind.
It's cool. It's cool.
It's totally fair.
League of Upsets.
League of Upsets, yeah. And so does this change now with the new patch, Yamato? That's kind of the last thing I want to talk about. Is I obviously don't want you to go into detail as to what people are playing in scrims. I don't want you to give anything away coming into next week, but 8.2 had a lot of changes. From your experience with scrims, have things like completely changed? Is everything going to be different in the meta, or does it still feel like mostly the same to you?
Well, in our case, there's always difference because we always change the meta in scrims. We always, the next week you guys is going to see something new and exciting, and that's the agenda of this year for Vitality.
You're that kind of team.
We're always gonna find something new and exciting, and we're always gonna try to be one step ahead, like we did the previous weeks with our compositions that were beautiful in their own way. And when it comes to the changes, I think the big one is in bottom. I think the Targon's Brace and the return of Doran's Blade and Doran's Shield is going to...
That's all I wanted to hear. Just say it. Doran's items are back. Yeah, double targets.
Like the thing is, it's like finally we can play around bottom. And sure,
Sweet music,
the melee supports are still pretty OP because they're just unkillable. But maybe there's a shift of focus because in LCS are all around playing around top lane. That's why all the Gangplanks and the Vladimirs and the Camille's are showing up. And it's like Khan meta there because that's what makes sense. Playing around bottom is just non-existent unless Kallista's in the game. And that's something that's supposed to be permanent, in my opinion.
Sweet. And
All right,
then
that's
if
what I
Ornn
want.
is gone as well, or at least he's slightly
That nerf is
prioritized,
fat, dude.
then there's less tanks in the top lane, and then we're going to get more carry matchups.
You hear that, folks? 8.2 is the promised land.
Also, Zombie Ward got nerfed, so the vision in the early game is not as strong, means early game junglers can have more impact, hopefully. I'm smelling potentially a great patch with some early game fighting.
All right. The patch is exciting. Things will change. Last question, round this whole thing out. Does this end the league of upsets? Are we going to see top teams return to the top because we have a new meta with a lot more options where it's easier to punish a bottom lane? Or are we going to say, or is Giants and Vitality, are these guys the new kings of EU or any one of the top 4 teams currently in EU LCS?
I think Vitality will stay around the top. I don't know if they're going to be like top 2, but they're going to be around the top for this split. Rocket and Giants is where it's hard to predict. I think if it is more early game focused, I see Giants suffer a little bit more than Rocket on that one. I'm still not convinced that G2 is just randomly going to show up and look really good now. I really hope they will, but if it is more early game focused and Wonder can play carry top, Yankers can focus more on early game, like that combination could be super good. I really love League of Upsets, though. It's fun going into every matchup, except for Unicorns Aloft, because they're going to lose right now. But every other matchup, and then be like, oh, I have actually no idea who's going to win this. Like, which team is going to win? So I hope not. Give me one more patch with this. But I could definitely see some of the top teams start climbing up the standings.
This is a shift towards a return to the status quo.
If the meta changes, which we hope.
Back to the bourgeois, I suppose.
I think like the meta, like maybe I got you guys too excited. It's not gonna change that much, People melee supports are still OP. Time Kent, your love is still in the mix, But
do you know how hard it is to cast a 50-minute game with like 2 kills in it?
I know.
You're literally standing there being like, yeah, and they're probably gonna kill a ward here, and they did kill the ward.
All right, I don't want to stay on this for too
anyway,
long.
Yamato, go. Sorry, I interrupted you.
But just to follow up on that, we literally get to the point in the cast where we haven't talked about any action for 30 minutes. So when a fight finally does happen, I will legitimately forget that my job is to talk about fights and be like, oh, that's interesting. They finally decided to start at Baron. Like, 2 seconds later, oh, wait.
Start yelling.
I'm supposed to start yelling. Like, this is exciting. I'm supposed to be excited now. Anyway, continue.
Go ahead.
League of Upsets. I think Spring Split, teams tend to suck in Spring Split. It's like Unicorns of Love in the past. They used to be good in spring because everyone sucked in spring, and they played in a way that is good against teams that suck. Just sit in this bush, pick up a guy, and just group down mid, run it down. It works because people are so uncoordinated. And then when it comes to summer split, Unicorns of Love philosophy of how to play the game just disappears completely. They don't get to Worlds, even though everyone's like, this is the Unicorns of Love year, but it's just the same Unicorns of Love all the time with how they play. And I think that is like the best example of how spring split and summer looks like. Just everyone kind of sucks in spring. And I think some teams with in terms of upsets, I think they're still going to exist because of best of one. I think there's going to be less and less of them. And it's going to be very evident coming into maybe week 6, 7, who is actually the top.
All right, so for our next segment, we're going to be talking about Vitality. Of course, we have YamatoCannon here, so it feels appropriate. And Martin, you were really curious as to some things about the offseason, so why don't you kick us off?
All right, so you guys announced your lineup I wouldn't say super late, but it was later than some of the first few teams, like 3 or 4 teams already announced the lineups. We didn't hear anything from Vitality. A lot of rumors were going around, big names, whatever.
Marin.
Yeah, Marin was one of them. And then you guys announced, of course, the 4 Giants, former Giants players, Jack Troll, Mini Trupex, Jiizuke, Gilius, and you keep Quickshots. So I would love to hear how this offseason was for you when you built this team and what kind of other plans there were maybe, or if this was just like from the get-go you wanted this kind of lineup.
It was crazy. This offseason was absolutely like, it was really crazy. So like my approach to the offseason was like, I'm just gonna make like 15 rosters, like in my head, or not in my, I used the paper and pen, of course, but like
I mean, you're smart.
in my mind, no, I wasn't like the Rain Man seeing rosters flying all across the place. No, like I was just trying to mix and match rosters and make sure it makes sense on paper. Get players that work well together, like make sure that the bot lane is good with communication, because I've run into problems in the past where I have 2 players in the bot lane that don't talk, and then you don't have a jungler that is that decisive. I think that was like one of our biggest issues in Splice. We had Mickey and Kobe, which aren't the most talkative players. They are very good mechanically, very skilled. They know where to be. But when it came to the topic of playing around bot lane, there was an issue, because when Trashy played with Senkooks and Wonder, they were always very decisive. Wonder and Senkooks knew what they wanted. They were like, do this and do that. And Trashy was very, very good at supplying that. So it was very important for me to get a good mixture of communication. This is something that I haven't looked at in the past. For me, it was all about, I have 5 players. The dynamic is going to be unique, and I'm going to handle it no matter what comes. And I'm just going to get 5 players that are individually skilled. So I looked at communication more as a skill, because that's something that a lot of players lack. Even though, people say, oh, you bring in Koreans, they're not going to communicate. There are European players that don't communicate, and it's just the same situation, right? And that was a big deal for me. Like there was like this idea that I could be sitting on the Spice roster right now, but with Quickshots top lane, that was something that was like in consideration
that
for me.
was one of the options
but
that
then,
you were looking at.
Yeah. But it was like, I also looked at, I was looking at North American junglers, because their jungle pool was like greater than ours at the time. I was looking at the junglers in Europe, but they were very hard to snag in the shape of Jankos and Maxlore, but I'm very happy with my choice, I think...
what about Marin?
Marin, it was crazy, because there's these 2 people over in Korea that, not 2 people, I'm sure there's more. They're like, they're trying to get the Korean players overseas. They're like, yeah, get this guy. And every day I got a message, Marin and Bengi, that is the combo you want. they want this money, and it's going to be worth it, And I'm like, it's going to be disaster if I go for that, And my idea was like, I like to work with players that are clean slates in a way. I think when I can shape their mindset and kind of shape their thinking, I feel like I can have the most success. I try to enable players to think about the game in an effective way. It's hard for me to describe it now.
So in the past, just to jump in, was that something you think you struggled with on Vitality last year? Because you did have a lot of veteran names on the older Vitality roster in terms of Vander, Steelback. Was it harder, do you think, to kind of implement that style of coaching when you had so many veteran players?
I think it's very common for players to kind of peak. And I think when you work with players that have played for a very long time, it's very hard to change their ways of thinking, especially in one split. I was in Vitality for 1 split. I think we ended strong. We didn't get to playoffs. It was all the same on paper, right? But I think we ended strong and we did some progress. We took a game of Misfits, took a game of G2 here and there, and it was okay. But it's very, very hard to change like a person's mindset about something that they've been doing for a very long time. So you get to kind of work with players that have their own ideas, and there's a benefit to that too, because they have experience. You can learn from that. But in the end, if they have tendencies that are negative, it's hard to just erase them, and it takes a lot of effort and time. And when you have players that haven't played the LCS and they come in, they're hungry, they're motivated, then the question of motivation and hunger is something that is unquestioned. The difference between this roster and any other roster, I can feel it when we're on stage and we're saying 1, 2, 3 Vitality. It is like I can feel it in my body how motivated these guys are. And I think that is a big difference in with these more seasoned players. They're like, this is my lifestyle, I'm doing this is what it is. And then there are players that are these championship players that have this formula of success, and then there's people that don't. And it's hard to teach that formula to players that have been around for a long time.
I super love the point about like the hunger. Like Gilius actually talked about this in some of the interviews as well. Like bring in rookies, they work harder than others because they need to prove themselves. They want to have success instantly. And when we saw this roster and we, heard the confidence about how they could be a top team immediately in the first split. Mini Truex wants to be the best AD carry, Jiizuke mid lane, and these kind of things. Like, at first you look at me like, that's just like smack talk or whatever before, and like, that's not really serious. But then you watch the team in week 1 and you're like, oh, they really mean it. Like, these guys are so passionate on stage. Like, we can hear them through our headsets when we're casting, screaming when stuff is happening.
Yeah, and so the worst thing is that sometimes there's a little bit of a delay, right? Spectators get like the perfect shot, like 2 or 3 seconds or whatever, and so I'll hear Jiizuke or whoever like top of their lungs, and I'll be like, all right, well, in 2 or 3 seconds, someone's gonna die, and then there it is, right there. It's like a spoiler.
But it's so like I love watching players who really seem to love being on stage and being part of this, because that drive and that passion. It's going to make you work harder. It's going to make you want to do your absolute best to win. And seeing hungry players, as a person who's been around this scene, just like you, YamatoCannon, for many, many years, we've seen all kinds of players. We've seen the ones who are just naturally gifted but don't care. We've seen the ones who are not very gifted but care a lot. And typically the guys who work really hard and have the passion, they end up being some of the absolute best. And they end up being easy to work with as well, because they're willing to change to get the best result. And it seems to me like this roster, from what you're saying and from what the interviews are saying, like it is a group of young players who just want to play really good and fun League of Legends on stage, and they want to win so badly. And it makes every Vitality game for me fun to watch. Yeah. So I really like that part, and I think it's a cool mix.
I think something that I was worried about was, I think about these players that have had this history of destroying everyone and winning the Challenges series and winning the LVP, and I was thinking, like, how would they deal with losses? But when you have so motivated and hungry players, it's so easy to just set up the concept, if you want this, you got to do this and this. And this, you just explain why it's positive for them. They're like, yes, I need to do this shit. I'm going to write it down. I'm going to do it every day. So it's very easy to work with players that have this type of mindset, and it's so infectious. I wake up every morning, I'm like, holy moly, I wake up before my alarm, I wake up, I'm feeding my cats, and I'm like doing it with passion. No, but it's like, it's so exciting to go to work every day because like it's so infectious. I think Gilius at the core, he was the one that kind of started with the players and like the kind of confidence, and that has spread to the players. And Gilius has had such a central role to their mindset of how to perceive themselves and their enemy and the game. And I think that's amazing because all of them are so confident.
So is Gilius, is he the leader? Is he the captain on this team?
I wouldn't say captain. I think there was a time in Giants where Gilius definitely was the captain, because he was surrounded by players that were virtually like no names.
Yeah.
Sure, this guy played French League or whatever. They were virtually no names. And he was definitely the captain back then, but he has helped the other players grow so much. So they kind of have caught up to him in that sense that everyone is at the point where everyone knows about the game, everyone understands the role. In terms of in-game, Gilius takes up a massive role of how to, like, he's very good at being decisive. He's calling, making clear call, willing to take the responsibility of it. He's willing to just say, we do this now, and everyone follows. So in that sense, sure, he has a leadership role in the game. But the more and more we move on, I've noticed that the jungle role, of course, as any role, it's difficult to just say, you shot call for everyone, you micromanage this. Impossible.
Right.
So I'm trying to push it in the direction where everyone has their own responsibilities, but Gilius has a massive one in the team.
So I'm curious, you talk about right now this hunger going on, and even a single loss is like not deterring you. They're just like taking it in stride. It's just one step, want to get better as quickly as possible. Are you worried at all that, like, if you guys keep losing games or if you suddenly find yourself struggling, that this will break? Or are you confident that, like, you can maintain this indefinitely?
I'm not worried at all. Like I see that as my job. I see it as I have players. They're supposed to think about what's happening in front of them now. They're supposed to think about what's happening in this moment. They're practicing in this moment. They're playing LCS. For me, I think about the past and the future. So I plan ahead. I make sure that the players understand the concept of getting better and becoming a champion, what it means, not just in terms of results, because to me, results don't matter. Because what I usually do at the beginning of a split, I ask every player, what do you want? Do you want money? And then one guy says he wants bitches. One guy says he wants fame. One guy says he wants whatever. And I tell them, you will get all this shit if you just improve. And what does it mean to improve? It's to make sure that every single day is as useful as possible. And I push this idea, no matter what is happening, onto them every single day. And that is like the fundamental core of my philosophy when it comes to practice. So regardless of what will come our way, I'm going to push this idea and ingrain it in their mind that no matter what happened in the past or in the future, it's all about the moment and how you perceive it and how you take it.
We talk about Gilius as an individual player.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about the hottest name in EULCS right now. Yamato, Jiizuke, in the
Italian
the Italian style. First of all,
I was going to ask who wanted bitches, but you can go to Jiizuke. That's fine. The Italian stallion.
I need to ask first, what nicknames do you have for him? Because the community has found a lot of really awesome ones.
I just know, like there's a meme in the house, like there's a mozzarella. It's just, there was this thing, like whenever we order, like there was this period and like we had like this 2-week period when we didn't have a chef in the house. So we ordered a lot of Italian food and he's like, this is not Italian food. And we're like, this is mozzarella. He's like, no, this is not mozzarella. Mozzarella, it explodes in the mouth. It has milk. It is milky. You can eat only mozzarella with rice and it's a beautiful dish. And it became a bit of a meme, but we call him, usually when people pronounce his name wrong, that is what we call him, but most of the time it's Jiizuke, because that's what he wants to be called. Mm-hmm. So when we are joking around, maybe it's Jiizuke, and most of the time Jiizuke.
So I really want Big Jizz to become a thing for him.
I didn't know if I was allowed to say it, because this is something that I call him.
You call him that?
You said bitches already. You call him Big Jizz at this point.
I tweeted it, man. I think that's such a cool name. It's fun to see because Jiizuke right now is this kind of player that almost no one knows about unless you are like someone who's followed Giants or you're an Italian player, because of course then you know Jiizuke is the first Italian player coming in. And now I feel like 2 weeks in, 4 games in, everyone who watches EULCS, they know Jiizuke. And this guy is just like, he's like number 1 in like every stat, first of all, from mid laner, so that's already cool. But the way he plays, like he's in your face, he's like forcing plays with Gilius, he tower dives early on, he 1v2s in the bot lane, he makes calls for base races, like...
And outside of that, just 1, that's already insanely impressive. And 2, just the fact that in any context, we've had a player who in his first few games has transitioned with complete confidence onto the EULCS stage. That is the first time I can think of this actually happening in as long as I have been casting EULCS, at least. I have never seen a rookie where I've come in and I've heard from their coach or from the rookie themselves that they go, yeah, I played better on stage. Usually it's like, I'm way worse. I need to figure out how to transition this performance to stage, but this guy just pops off.
So tell us, how is it to coach the greatest Italian player of all time?
It's amazing. It's like Jiizuke is... such an amazing person as well as a player. I think, I forgot a nickname. We call him Jiizu most of the time. Jiizu, it's a bit cute.
Like that's nice.
One for the ladies.
Yeah. So he's such an amazing person because, he's laughing in game, he's spreading joy, he's emotional in that sense. And I think, his approach to the game is amazing. Like, he's the type of player, like sometimes you run into a player that really strives for perfection all the time. Like no matter what the matchup is, I have a player that, what were you thinking here? He can always explain it. Sometimes you have players, I fucked up here. And they're thinking like, I wasn't really thinking. But Jiizuke always, he can tell me his thought process. And I think that is the hardest part about playing League. It's not about understanding the basics or knowing the basics, because at the core of it, it's pretty simple. I'll push here and move here. It's more about staying concentrated at all times and also applying thought process to every single moment, because games tend to be very long. Imagine really focusing in on your homework for 40 minutes. Sometimes you check a phone, sometimes you do look at the ceiling, you look at the time. That is what people call studying. But
Never really looked at the ceiling, but the other ones, yeah.
now, sometimes,
Missing out.
I was thinking, I used to study in bed and then you like rotate around, try to find a comfortable
Find
position.
any reason not to study. Yeah.
Pretty much. But Jiizuke always can tell me a thought process, and I think that's amazing because if a player has that, it means that he's thinking about every single step that he's doing in game. He's not doing anything uncalculated. He can always tell me, oh, you died here? Oh, it's because I thought this and this. And that's amazing to me. And what he is outside of the game, he's very easy to work with, very lovable guy. I don't think anyone would have any issues with him, just hang out with him. It's, his laughter, it's so infectious. I remember we were like, we were at this like Korean restaurant. It was a really like small place, but it was pretty crowded, like a small like underground kind of thing. Like we were the only like non-Korean people. So it was that kind of place, And then he's like, I pointed out that we were eating like, we were 8 people and we had like 7 barbecues going for us. And then we looked over at a different table and there was like 6 people surrounded by 1 barbecue. And I pointed that out. I was like, these people are going to go home hungry. And he just died over the laughter and it was so loud. Everyone was looking at him. And I was like, this is the best
Like
situation
you're like slightly
ever.
embarrassed, but you're also laughing hysterically.
I didn't give a shit. I was dying out of laughter. And then eventually like some other people started laughing. And it was just such the people we were laughing at started laughing because he was laughing. And then I was like, these people have no idea we're laughing at them. And then he just kept on dying. And everyone, like, there was a lot of people laughing for no reason. It was just such a moment that I will never forget because it kind of highlights what Jiizuke is as a person. He makes other people laugh. And it's like sometimes something happens in scrims or something that's just not funny at all. Like, it's not funny. And he just finds it a little bit funny and he just dies. And his laughter is like, shit, man. I can't hold back.
So we know when Vitality pauses, it's because Jiizuke is laughing and like, I need a moment.
Someone else in the team's like crying, like, please, we'll take the fine, just pause the game.
All right, sounds good, man. I love watching him play.
Yeah, and I think everyone's hyped on Jiizuke right now, but I want to talk also about your bottom lane, because I feel like Mini Trupax, after the loss, he unfollowed everybody on Twitter. He's like, nose to the grindstone, I'm taking everything super serious, and I feel like maybe it's a little bit because of the meta, but it doesn't seem like we've gotten to see Mini Trupax really strut his stuff. It seems like he's been a role player thus far. So I want to kind of set some expectations from him. What do you think we can expect from Mini Trupax when we're not in a meta where an AD carry sits in lane for 30 minutes, right?
So my big picture about this roster is that I feel I can play anyway. I can play through mid, I can play through bottom, I can play with the jungle, focus, Lee Sin, whatever jazz you can think of. That is, and with top lane, we can play whatever the hell. We already talked about that subject. But the point is, right now, the way drafts have been going, I prepared a lot of drafts that revolve around playing around bot lane. I'm just waiting for that to happen. Because Mini Trupax and Jack Troll, when they are the focus of the game, they can be really, really deadly. Like these are players... these are 2 players that are known for playing Thresh and Kalista the most. If you have a player that plays Thresh and Kalista the most, just wait until the meta shifts in the right direction.
I mean, they did that in Challenger and in Spain and so on, where they were like stomping lanes
and
super
they were
hard.
destroying people.
Yeah.
And then the difference there was that Ruin, I would consider him like one of the most obvious role players because he's playing the tanks and the Gnar, and beyond that, he's not really expanding, so it worked very well. But I'm trying to find a way in draft that sometimes if the enemy drafts a specific way, you need to be ready to kind of pivot. And we've only played 4 games. And those scenarios were when we played around top side because of how the draft went. But we are very well and ready for other draft situations when we are forced to play around bottom or we want to play around bottom. Because Mini Trupax and Jack Troll, they really, really impressed me from the get-go. Like I had... high expectations for the roster, but I was thinking with the bot lane how they have to move on the map, where they need to be, the vision game, the kind of the Mithy mindset, as I call it. Mithy, where the last year, like when I was in Splice and when we went to Worlds, Mithy taught me so many things about how to play bot lane because we just scrimmed him all the time and I was just reviewing what he was doing. And I thought I would have to teach them many things about where to be, where to roam, how to pressure into mid, how to pressure the map, how to play with the jungler. And that was something that came very naturally. And then when we start scrimming against what we consider the best bot lanes, I can see them competing, solo killing. So I'm like, holy moly, I'm excited. These are players that in no corner have a weakness in this regard.
Who's the best bot lane in Europe?
Best bot lane in Europe? In this case, I'm not gonna involve my players. Well, it's just... I can involve my players. Like, to be honest, it's hard to say right now.
Because Sven and Mithy are gone, obviously.
Sven and Mithy is gone. Reckless Hylissang was something that was hyped, but I think Hylissang that doesn't really fit in Fnatic as it seems right now when we talk about Reckless and his performance. I think Upset and Vander, they played 2 games. One game was like Schalke being kind of mediocre against Splice, I would say. And that is another bot lane that is hyped. But I feel like it's too soon to say. I think Mini Trupax and Jack Troll definitely in the contention for being the best bot lane in Europe.
My impression is that if we had a different meta, it would be way easier to say who the best bot lane is. But because of the meta, it's just, even honestly, if we played 10 more games or 5 more games for every team in this meta, you would be looking really deep to find one bot lane. This guy uses his Targon stack a little bit better than this other guy. Ooh, like it feels like it's so hard to find those really big advantages to actually say who's on top there.
Yeah, because especially like AD carries that looked very bad last year are looking like, yeah, this guy is good. This guy is okay.
Stopwatch meta, baby.
Yeah.
Relic Shield, Overheal.
Free boots.
I'm really disappointed in the change. 8.3, like they did move up and change Biscuit position. People are just going to go Stopwatch and Biscuit. I'm like, come on.
Yeah, you're just going to pick that instead of boots.
Like Stopwatch, put it at 10 minutes and do something else with it. Like it's too much.
We'll see. I mean, 8.3 is a while out. Maybe we'll see if they decide to change that one. Yeah. It's kind of a final question to talk about Vitality. I want to talk about something that's kind of a perception that I feel like is associated with you now, Yamato, in the sense that you have a pretty good track record of taking new players and new teams with Splice specifically and kind of leveling them up to being at a top tier competitive level. But I don't feel like you ever, in your history outside of your trip to Worlds, you've never like taken a team over the edge. You've never made a team of champions in EU. And I'm curious if you feel like, is this finally the team for you, for Vitality, that you can take to the top tier for EU LCS?
For sure. I think our starting point this time around is much closer to a championship level than it was in Splice. Like our first split in Splice, there was a lot of work to be done. And the guys were working very hard and they got what they deserved because they worked very, very hard for a very long time. I think when I look at my history, I love projects that are perceived by other people as, yeah, these guys are bad. This is, I like those type of challenges. Like when I joined Rocket, that was a team that was in relegations. And I took them to a position in one split when we took Origin to 5 games.
That was
the regional
their
qualifier.
Nuke Duck mid, Yankos jungle, Vanda support.
Mr. Rallis after we kicked Woolite, and then Steve in top lane.
And Steve top lane, yeah.
So I love those type of projects. And then I had propositions to go over to North America for big money with fantastic rosters on paper and things like this. And I was like, Splice is really interesting. Splice... or at the time, I don't know what they're called, some strange as Esports newspaper
Follow
or something.
Esports.
Follow
Esports.
Yeah.
Because it was Dignitas and then it was Follow Esports.
Holy, I'm happy they took it into the barn and just shot it in the head. It was
hey, you
really,
went to the
really
farm.
bad.
You're not supposed to talk about what happened at the farm. They said the farm, Yamato.
It was absolutely horrible. And I think when it comes to, like, people view me as, this roster peaks out. And, when I look at Splice, we had issues that were hard to overcome, and I didn't have the tools to do that. And Splice eventually, the original roster disbanded. And I think that was the right thing to do, because I feel like the dynamic we had, it was kind of peaked out, while the individual players still had the potential to be more than what we became. I think we definitely kind of tapped out what we could have become. We took second place and we went to Worlds. And I think when it comes to Splice alone, I think we did as much as we could. And I think it was time that when I decided to move on was because I felt like I couldn't get anything more out of the situation. I didn't feel like I could improve. I didn't feel like I could improve the situation either. So it just made sense to me to move on because I want to improve myself. I want to feel like I am progressing something and not just be there for show.
And when it comes to self-improvement, do you feel like your knowledge was at any point an issue when it came to developing a team? Do you feel like how much have you grown as a coach? Is I guess what I'm trying to get at here. Like, have you gone from a coach who maybe couldn't have taken a team to the top, and are you now at a point where you feel like in your career that you have enough knowledge that you could take a team like Vitality and get them to first place in Europe?
I think it's just a question of what my focus is. I feel like when I put a lot of time into understanding what the metagame is and understanding how to play the game and how to play the game at the highest level, I feel like I can just get that understanding. But there was a point in time where I focused on different team aspects, and there was like an issue we had in Splice. I focused on other issues and other things that were going on in my life that I dealt with at the time, and that is no excuse. It was just a situation that was. I was promised to get an apartment before the LCS split started, and I got it in the middle of February. And of course, it's a difficult thing to get an apartment in Berlin, right? So it's not about nagging on anyone. It was more about, it was very hard for me as an alone person in Berlin to move into somewhere and figure all that stuff out. So I had very little free time, and I think that impacted how much I could do in terms of research about other teams. And I think when it comes to coaching a league team, it's something that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. I work maybe 14 hours a day, and I'm fine with that. And there was a time where I couldn't do that. And I think that hurt me a lot. And that was that spring split with Splice. And to answer your question, I think knowledge-wise, I think I know more than most coaches on the scene, especially in the West. I don't think, some of these coaches that call themselves coaches and they are never played a game in their life and they are just drafting based off of theory. I don't think the game works like this. I think they are very far behind. And I think when it comes to game knowledge, I can, when I have time to put focus on it like I do now and like I have this year and the time and Vitality, then I feel like I understand the game at the highest level.
Do you win the spring split?
Yes.
Now it is time for the EUphoria EU LCS Power Rankings. Now, Yamato, you weren't
last time.
you weren't here last week, so I'm not going to hold this against you, but I will update the audience. So first, we're going to do our Power Rankings, and then we're going to compare them to the current standings before we maybe have some modest changes this week. So last week, our Power Rankings were Fnatic, number 1, G2, number 2, Misfits, number 3, not terrible out of all the things, Schalke, number 4, Vitality, number 5, Giants, number 6, number 7 was Roccat, number 8 was H2K, number 9 was Splice, and number 10 was Unicorns of Love. And now, if we take a second to compare that to the standings, you may notice a little difference. First place is a four-way tie between Misfits, Giants, Roccat, and Vitality. And then the three-way tie for 5th place is between Schalke, Fnatic, and Splice, with G2 Esports and H2K both tied for 8th, and Unicorns of Love at a 0-4 in last place. So now, my friends, it is time for us to make a new list.
Yes.
Last time, we went from 10th place up. Any preferences this time around? How do you want to start out? Is there any clear... Do you want to just put your team number 1 to get it over
Number
with?
10 is easy.
Yeah.
Number 10 is classic,
really
guys.
easy.
Say it. Someone just has to say it.
Unicorn.
Yeah. And to me, I gotta say, so last time we were debating a lot with number 9. Was it Splice? Was it H2K? Was it Roccat, sitting down there? I mean, to me right now, number 9 needs to be H2K.
Yeah.
I'm glad you agree, so we don't have to have a huge debate.
They had like that one thing against Fnatic, but that was Fnatic.
Well, and that's why we were hyped on them last time. We're like, ooh, maybe.
Because they were 1-1,
H2K,
they had that upset,
we saw a couple of really good team fights.
They moved 1 down. They were 8 last time, they're number 9.
It's crazy. I feel bad for UL though, because that guy, the UL crowd, they just don't know what winning is anymore, so they just shout unicorns even after a loss, and I'm like, that's not how
that's
chanting
fan support,
works.
man.
Yeah, that's a fan you want.
Support.
Maybe.
We're going to get the Italian fans in there.
I'm not hearing anyone screaming for Vitality right now. You might be a little bit jealous over there.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what it is.
Level it up. Okay, well, so Unicorns of Love, easy. threw it away. Don't even really have to talk about that much. H2K also feels pretty easy as they disappointed and they were in 8th anyway. But now things get modestly more difficult. So we have a lot of teams remaining. H2K and Unicorns of Love, the only ones placed thus far. Who is 8th place?
G2?
Yeah, I'm thinking G2 as well.
Yeah.
Wait, just to be clear, 4-time back-to-back European LCS, just so we know who we're putting in 8th place.
Listen, right now, they do not play very well in the late game. In a meta where it's all about the late game for most teams, some of the draft choices have been very questionable. Again, the Skarner one really stands out. Like, Jesus, that was so bad. Like, I think Perks is performing pretty well. I need to see way more from the bottom lane, especially Yanin in late game fights. And Wadid can't play his usual like very aggressive style when he's on Tahm Kench every game. So
or not in the case of the Skarner
or
game.
not in the Skarner game. So honestly, G2 8th place, it feels good to me.
Yeah.
The only reason I'm just going to ask, is Splice, are we comfortable now putting Splice above them after the last week of games? Because Splice was the other one that was a pretty clear 9th place last time around.
I forgot about Splice.
but that's the thing. Is like I think that Splice is probably one of the teams that we expect to put Nest on the list, potentially a candidate for 7th. But are we okay putting G2 Esports below Splice? It all feels weird. Don't worry.
Kobe
Yamato.
had the pentakill. It's a best of one only, but we only have 4 games to base this on, and we can't base it on scrims. So Splice just ended up winning that last game, and Kobe popped off, and the Zillion support was in there.
I think right now I would rate Splice higher, but if it was like for the future, you know, if I'm going to like rate them of what I have as expectations, I think G2 have a higher peak than Splice. I feel like Splice is filled with players that were kind of on the sidelines of the success of their past teams, and I think Kobe and Xerxa are good players, but I think the rest of them are just side characters of the success of the past.
Dang.
But it is great point.
For now.
Yeah, I love that point.
For now. But this is, of course, the Week 2 power rankings. So it does feel bad for Ottawamne, though, on the sideline of success for H2K. But, so we are comfortable putting H2K as of moving into Week 3 now, or rather G2 in 8th place. Splice then would be 7th.
Yamato?
Yeah. Amen.
Nail it. Put it in.
Boom.
There we go. The bottom 4 is locked. Now it is the playoff team.
Can we just appreciate that Splice, G2, H2K, and Unicorns of Love are our bottom 4 teams?
4 of the organizations that would always fight for the top.
It's crazy.
Just one split ago.
It's absolutely crazy to see like the logos. Upcoming matchup. Fnatic against H2K. And it's like, oh, man.
Yeah.
We cast Misfits versus H2K. I was like, we would have been really excited about the hardcore macros that would have shown for this game last split. Well, now we're excited to see if they get to late game.
Then we had 30 minutes with 1 kill and 3 pauses due to Alfari's PC that we almost went on stage to beat up. And then the moment the last pause ended, Baron got started by H2K, and I have no idea what they were doing there. Like, they all decided to say, guys, let's group behind the Baron. So 1, we stuck in the pit. 2, the Baron is going to hit us. And then when the enemy shows up, only 1 of us will jump out and fight them. And the other 4 will stand behind and yell, yeah, go Centurion! You can do it!
Haven't you seen any street fight ever? Those are like the rules, dude. You are only, technically, Misfits are the bad guys there because they didn't obey the rules.
Is it a street fight or like a dance fight?
Yeah.
Like dance up.
I mean, from what H2K did, they apparently thought it was a dance fight because it definitely was not much of a fight.
Quick moves from Centurion, then he jumped right back into the pit, and they were all just hiding, and then they all died, and the game ended, and it was like, yeah, this doesn't make any sense. So, yeah, that's our bottom 4. There we go.
Okay.
Now it gets interesting.
Number 6.
Ooh.
Now, last time around, this was Giants. This time around, Fnatic. How do we feel about Fnatic?
I'm worried.
Keep in mind, currently in the standings, Schalke and Fnatic are both tied in 5th place at 2-2. Splice is there as well. But
and Schalke played 2 games with a sub, obviously.
Yeah.
Upset is back now. He was pretty sick last week as well.
I'm just thinking like Fnatic, I think the big difference between G2 and Fnatic, I feel like G2 can gradually progress, but I think Fnatic can just get the shit together, you know? And will I expect them to do it next week?
Based on, let's just
Based
say,
on right
based
now.
on right now, what you've seen, of course, if you've scrimmed, we don't really need to know, but you can use that to influence your opinion.
I'm okay with Fnatic number 6 based on right now.
I'm okay with that too.
I mean, they have good early games. I will give them that credit for sure. I think Caps had 2 really good games as well, and then the Vitality game was rough for him where he got ganked a lot. But he's had some games like against G2. He was the person who forced the kills that led to a Baron, that led to Fnatic winning the game. And I think Caps, is kind of the player to look at right now on Fnatic side, while Reckless is going to try and figure out his own stuff. But at the moment, the late game shot calling is all over the place.
Yeah.
It's chase kills, it's random split push. There doesn't seem to be a coordinated plan. And in this meta, as we have seen, the group up as 5 and have synergy in team fights kind of team, they win.
Yeah. I think when I think of Fnatic, like individually, they are fantastic. Like Caps, Soaz, and Reckless, I think they are great. I think the early game, the only reason it works is because they are so good in lane. Because I think their idea of how to play the early game is very wrong most of the time. I think this was like when I reviewed all the Worlds games, it was my heaviest criticism of Fnatic. They have no clue how to play through mid lane. And that is like a big deal. Like mid lane is central, is the core of how you play, and you have a mid laner that can create pressure. The only thing that I've been seeing right now is that Soaz, like the only lane that Brox is really impacting is the top side. And in the past with Jezza, it was like those lane ganks that Brox are like doing into bottom. Right now, the only reason Fnatic, I think, is successful in the early game is because they have very good laners. But I think there is, there's a lack of cohesion in every part of the game, not only the early game. And the only reason I think the early game is working is because Caps is destroying Niski in mid lane with 50 CS in a matchup that should be in Ryze's favor in the early game. So that's why it's working.
Do we put them number 6 then? Or
Yeah.
like it's between them, Schalke, Giants for me, for number 6.
I think that this, out of the remaining teams, right, that would be in the top 6, Fnatic feels like they're just the one that has the least coordination. Whereas every other team, you can credit like 1 or 2 of their losses to like some poor decisions or some poor draft mistakes. Every one of Fnatic's losses feels like a different problem for me, right? Maybe it's reckless over pushing, as you mentioned in the Vitality game. Maybe it's some of those early games where they're just not supporting anybody, or where they're just relying on individual members to roll over. It never feels like a super crisp, clean transition when they're winning early game into snowballing, into ending the game.
Yeah, that's what they were known for, right? Like when I screamed Fnatic, I was amazed because it was so fast paced. It was like they get one lead, then they get every tower really fast, and then they just crush you. And right now, Fnatic does just. You have to ask yourself if Jessis was the glue that kept them together.
Definitely seems like it's hurting them right now. Missing Jessis. Number 5.
Yeah. So remaining, we have Schalke, Vitality, Roccat, Misfits, and Giants.
I think that's a Rocket for me.
Rocket for you?
Yeah.
Over, under Schalke and Giants and so on?
Yeah. I think I wouldn't put Schalke there. I'm comparing, like in my head, I'm comparing Giants and Rocket. And I think, there are some things, like I'm going to play Rocket, and I've noticed in my preparation against Rocket, we're not playing them next week, but we're playing them in the near future. And I've noticed some things that you can manipulate in your favor, and hopefully I can show you guys that when we face them.
Okay.
And I think, and then I'm comparing in the contrast of Giants is that their top lane pool is predictable, but I think the same thing can be said about Profit. So I think if you analyze Rocket and Giants, you can get some good information out of it.
I think the thing that I like the most about Rocket and Giants is just their shot calling when it actually comes to getting the Baron has been pretty good in terms of like go to the Baron, know exactly when you can start it, when you can force a fight with it, and that kind of part, which has done a lot of favors for them in the late game. Schalke is this team. I keep hyping Schalke because I really love the project, and it feels to me that they're the kind of team who will be able to play almost any meta, where if it's about playing early game, they can play around Chachi and Nuke Dog, especially. If it's about playing for late game, they have Upset as a great late game AD carry. Chachi can play tanks top lane. They can play like multiple styles, and while they did lose a game with a sub and then lost a game as well now to Splice with Upset in there, I still like how they play for the majority of the game. So I definitely agree with not putting Schalke number 5. So for me, it's between Rocket and Giants. And if you feel confident in Rocket there,
Yeah, like
okay
I wouldn't
putting in
mind if
Rocket.
with Giants there too, man. Like,
I
I think they're very similar.
I think both of these teams. It's hard to see a world where they overtake any of the three teams that we would currently rate above them, which is Misfits, Vitality, and Schalke, right? Because part of Schalke's loss feels like playing with a substitute, and additionally, from everything we've seen, both Rocket and Giants have these great strengths, but they feel very limited. They've yet to show us more.
It is a power ranking right now. You know, we can't really play around. Technically, we can't play around what happens when the meta shifts, because at the moment, I'm not confident that if Schalke and Giants played each other like 3 games in a row, that Schalke would just 3-0 Giants right there. I think Giants could easily win some of those games. So I'm fine with Rocket number 5. I think that one we can lock in.
Lock it in.
But for number 4, I'm really unsure if I want Schalke or Giants.
So the crazy thing for me about Schalke is that I look at all of their players and I'm thinking these are players that they are very inconsistent in their level of performance. So Jiizuke, when he is low, he's really, really low. But when he's high, it's super high. He's solo killing people or he's like solo dying. And then you have the jungler, which for some reason people still call a rookie, even though he was playing. He was playing in LCS. It's like, was he that invisible? No, but I think he also strikes me as someone that could come across as an emotional player, because his performance in Rocket was also very up and down. And then Nuktak as well. I think the more recent times he has become more consistent. His Vitality times with me and his current form. Vander is also a player that when it comes to important matches and in playoff matches, he tends to underperform to what people expect of him. And at the same time, Upset's reputation is that he has choked in moments that were important. So I'm thinking Schalke, the sky is the limit, but at the same time, you know, you can see the bottom of the valley, you know, when they're standing there at the edge. So I feel like it's a very emotionally loaded team that can go either way. But then you have to give some credit, you know, this Schalke and the management,
coaching staff.
Yeah, but I think at the same time, once again, I think we always, when we look at this, it's hard not to look at the future. It's hard not to look at the potential. But right now, we're talking about current level of performance, right? And Schalke is 2-2. Admitted to that was 1 week with a sub, but 1 week with upset as well. So is it fair to say that right now, Giants are the better team?
Giants have showed us 3 very good games. Obviously, I had a good early game against you guys as well. Then struggled to play around Baron actually in that game, or even they didn't even go to Baron. They literally just went mid 3 times and then they started losing because it came too late. So for me, like it's a coin toss between the two teams. I'm actually fine giving Giants that credit and say Schalke 4th, Giants 3rd right now. I like Giants draft. I like how they play team fights late game, and I think they have good chemistry early on, which is something the players talk about.
I agree with it. I think I think you put it very neatly. Like if Giants face Schalke right now, who would I bet my money on? I would put that money on Giants. Even though if I saw that bet, I would just stay away from it. But if I had to, gun to my head,
it's a risky one.
Then I would do it.
First place, second place.
First place, second place. Misfits or Vitality. Yamato, why don't you start?
Let's talk about truth, okay? Let's talk about what happened, you know. Our game against Misfits, the one thing they hung on to was our shitty national call, you know? So we gave them that, you know? We were 7K goal there.
Outsmiting Gilius.
Yeah, okay. Let's call it that. You know? it was one of the worst national calls that I've seen. You know, it was legit. You know, it was Dignitas. It was all of the bad names you can call a bad national. Right? It was horrible. Like we could have easily just pushed down mid. You know, 1-4 inhib is down, and then we just take over the entire jungle. Zoe with her 400 AP at 18 minutes is gonna one-shot some kids. You know, it was a very, very simple way of playing, but we didn't. You know, and I think the difficult part about playing the best team is getting yourself ahead, is getting yourself in a position where you are the one dominating. And we were 8-7K gold ahead. And if I make that comparison between us and Misfits, you know, that was our game to lose based on how we played. And with that being said, I think first place.
All right, I want you to jump in. I'm kind of sold. I'm going to be honest. Because, I mean, watching that game, I did not feel like Misfits were in the driver's seat at all.
I mean, Misfits drafted a very late game comp, first of all. they were against the Jax top lane, they were against the Zoe mid, and Senkuk's lost mid lane way too hard.
Yeah, so
that was a huge issue.
Obliterated.
Yeah, that was a big issue for sure. Misfits got to late game, found a Baron they shouldn't have found, obviously, and that is true. That really pulled them out. They were like down 7k gold, I think it was, at that point in the game, so it should have been a loss. I like how Misfits plays most of the time. I think they do understand a lot of like how to play the game the correct way, by the book, as we say. Like they don't go for the 50-50s, they go for the 80-20 in their favor. They value the vision and kind of the slow setup, which I think is good. But I gotta admit, I'm actually perfectly okay putting Vitality first place, even if they lost that game to Misfits. I think Vitality.
If they played again, would you think Vitality would win?
I mean, if you play the exact same game again, exact same draft, and then that Baron call doesn't happen, Vitality wins, right? I mean, that's how it is. So I think both teams are very close to each other, and they are, for me, clear top 2 teams in Europe right now. But I am okay, not just because Yamato is here, because we were fighting Perks last time. We put Fnatic first. I'm fine putting Vitality first for now, and put Misfits second place.
Damn right.
And
I'm
then
writing it in.
We can't let our segment next week.
We can't let our guest win every time. That's
he
the
didn't.
number
He
one
lost
rule.
last
I know.
time.
I'm just saying we have to be careful. People are gonna be like, you guys, it's cheating.
Something I would like to say about Misfits, though, what I give them credit to, what they're better at us doing, is how they control their vision. I think they're very controlled. I think
slow, sexy stuff.
The way they place their pings, how kind of cohesive their macro game is. I think that's something we are striving for.
I also think Hansama is playing really well at the moment.
Yeah, Mickey and Hansama. That's the bot lane I forgot to mention.
That's probably the bot lane who's performing the best at the moment in Europe. And Hansama has kind of, for now, taken the number 180 carry spot in Europe, in my opinion.
I think that is partially because of how I agree, and also partially because of how Misfits have drafted in their games. They've given him an opportunity, and a lot of AD carries have not received that opportunity to be put in that position.
All right, we have a completed tier list. So for all those of you who aren't writing this down as you go, listening, Unicorns of Love in 10th place, H2K in 9th, G2 in 8th place, Splice coming in at 7th, Fnatic coming in at 6th, Roccat coming in at 5th, Schalke coming in at 4th, Giants at 3rd, Misfits at 2nd, and none other than Vitality first place.
Is that going to hurt us later? Is that going to bite us in the ass?
I mean, it can't be any worse than last week, where we got
That's true. We had Fnatic and
everything
G2
wrong.
first. No, we had Unicorns number 10. That stayed.
We got that right. Thank you, Unicorns, for being consistent. We appreciate you. We'll find out if we're horribly wrong.
It's gonna be good, don't worry.
That is the EUphoria EULCS tier list. Power ranking. The power ranking.
There we go.
Final section of the day. It is none other than Quickshots. We've changed the name from Quickfire Predictions. It is Quickshots now, in honor of Deficio's favorite person on the broadcast team. Now, this is Quickfire Predictions. We're going to run through each of the 10 games this week. I'm going to say the game, and then you guys, when I say now or go or whatever word I choose in the moment, have to tell me who you think is going to win. As an update, so you know, Yamato, you're coming in at a good time because both Deficio and Perks, last week's guest, did awful. Deficio got 5 out of 10.
That's 50%.
Perks got 4 out of 10. So Deficio technically won, but I don't want to keep crediting him with
I
wins.
am currently leading. We will take all the guests and whatever they are, predicting, and we put that all together at the end of the year or end of the split. And then we'll see if I won or if the guests won. Currently, I am winning.
By 1. So please, Yamato,
I am winning.
Be better.
Let's go.
Than Perks. All right. First game on Friday. Unicorns of Love versus H2K. Go.
H2K.
H2K. Gotta wait for the go.
Gotta wait for the go. Oh, yeah. Wait for the go. Giants versus Roccat. Go.
Giants.
What is that late prediction? You can't just wait for him. You can't piggyback. Martin, be faster.
But I think you're jumping games. It's not on day 2.
Wait, you're reading the game?
He's reading the
Well, I
game.
was looking at the game.
I don't have the games.
All right, it's gone. It's gone.
You can put it away. Martin, you're a dirty cheater. No, it's not on day 2.
And you lost.
All right. Schalke versus Vitality. Go.
Vitality.
You put Vitality.
Yeah, that's what we do.
Okay.
It's what we do, baby. We gotta get some bets here.
All right. G2 versus Splice. Go.
G2.
Splice. All right.
Oh, we're different. Yeah,
Put Splice there. All right.
put
A
Splice.
lot of faith there.
Couldn't care less about this game. It's gonna go either way.
All right. Final game of day 1. Fnatic versus Misfits. Go.
Misfits.
All right. All right, moving on to day 2. The first game is Unicorns of Love versus Vitality. Go.
Vitality.
Yeah, right. Who's surprised? Okay. Next up, Schalke versus Giants. Go.
Schalke.
All right, the powerless not really holding true at this point, guys.
So week 2 only.
All right. Next one, Rocket versus Fnatic. Go.
Fnatic.
I want to say Rocket.
All right.
There it is.
I'm not believing in the revival of Fnatic just yet. Give it a week.
Yeah. All right. Next one, H2K versus G2. Go.
G2.
G2.
All right.
Yeah.
Final match of the week, Misfits versus Splice. Go.
Misfits.
Ooh, I'm smelling 10 out of 10 here.
Okay.
This feels like 10 out of 10 to me.
Well,
For me, yeah.
I think the Schalke Vitality.
You don't even trust your own power ranking. Where's your mind, Deficio?
New patches coming, another week of practice. Schalke is going to step on that stage. They're going to look
All
at
right.
Vitality and they're going to laugh in your face.
you guys actually disagree on a couple of them. Shall we let's take a Vitality one. The Vitality one, just surprisingly, you didn't disagree with it. Vitality would lose to Unicorns of Love, or
That one we agreed on.
yeah, okay, so you agree there. So Schalke versus Vitality. Let's get some quick hits. Yamato, why don't you start? Make the case. Why is Vitality going to take this game?
Our consistent performance is just better. I think we have players, if we look at the history of Mini Trupax against Upset, then you can obviously see that history doesn't lie and it will continue to be the same if you keep doing the same, putting Upset against Mini Trupax. So in this case, I think we have a clear edge and Mini Trupax is going to do some spanking.
Okay,
All right,
Deficio,
all right.
your rebuttal?
Well, I'm going on the other side of the map. I'm going top lane. I think Visichachi is gonna win the top side. I think this is the year of Nuke Duck. He's gonna be able to hold Jiizuke, not randomly lose lane like we've seen before. And the top side of the map is gonna be in favor of Schalke in this game. And they will stop the early snowball from Vitality. We're gonna go to late game, and then Upset can shine, and Schalke wins the game.
Well, I want you to go back in history once again and look at what happened to Vichisachi the last time he faced Cabochard. That was a quick 2-0 down to second place for Unicorns of Love. They could have secured first, and that's what happened the last time they faced
that's
against
history,
each other.
baby.
Here's the deal. Now, last time, we didn't even prompt this, but Perks was eager. So
He wanted to bet. That's
He wanted
true.
to bet. He wanted to bet. So the question is, Yamato, do you want to bet? Now, the ongoing bet, the theme is here. You have to admit publicly on Twitter that you were wrong and that Deficio is the greatest analyst of all time.
Also, the podcast is the greatest podcast of all time.
Yeah, that's true.
All right.
Throw that one in. Nice. If Schalke take down Vitality, but if Vitality beat Schalke, Deficio has to publicly apologize to you on Twitter and call you the greatest coach of all time.
Can we up the stakes somehow?
What
What more do you want?
do you got in mind?
How about some chicken?
All right.
All right, chicken
all
it
right.
is.
Chicken Boss.
Fried chicken.
Chicken Boss is on it as well.
right.
For those who don't know, we like to go out to eat chicken. So chicken on
Yeah.
the line, chicken and
Loser
Not-
pays for chicken and tweets.
I want like the Donkey Kong mojito too.
oh yeah, I don't know what that's called.
I'll get you the dessert as well if you win.
You get everything you want. I'm glad I'm not a part of this. Actually, I purely just I get chicken either way.
You hungry? You hungry, Draco?
This is so good.
Bring all your friends.
All right, well there you have it. Those are the quick shots for the week. We'll see how they turn out. All right, that's gonna do it for us here at the EUphoria podcast. Thank you so much, Yamato, for coming on and sharing the news about current #1 team in the Power Rankings, Vitality.
Definitely not biased at all. Thank you very much for the chicken you're going to buy for me very soon as
Oh
well.
yeah, also brought up that Cabo was highly underrated. So I think Yamato has pitched the case for Vitality, which is exactly what we wanted. We wanted to hear about this team. So thank you for coming on to do that. And thank you to everyone who's joined us thus far. This has been episode 2. If you guys want to check out the EULCS and see who actually is going to be correct Friday and Saturday this week, it's going to be hype. Starts with some Unicorns of Love. Week ends with some crazy matchups in the middle of the day. Of course, the one that the stakes are on, Schalke versus Vitality. That
Match
is
of the
Friday.
week as well, man.
Game 3. Stakes are on. It's not just about victory. It's also about chicken. Until then, we'll see you next time, guys. Thanks for listening.